Hi, welcome to this week's In the Hoods. This week we're going to be talking about Hell's Kitchen or Clinton. Both names are used synonymously for a neighborhood running from between 34th Street to the south, 59th Street to the north, the Hudson River to the west, and 8th Avenue to the east. Now, this New Yorker thinks of them as two separate neighborhoods. I think of Hell's Kitchen as running from 34th Street to about 45th Street to the north, and from 45th Street on up to 59th Street, I tend to call Clinton. But everywhere I've looked, they're called the same neighborhood. I disagree, but anyway. This neighborhood on the west side of Manhattan is really west of the main business district. To the south, Hell's Kitchen is known for its zoning, which only allowed for 6-story buildings. So you don't have super tall buildings. You didn't. It's also where Port Authority was built on 8th Avenue, providing transportation to New Jersey. West of 8th Avenue was kind of a little seedy, a little dicey. You had tenement buildings, which were initially built in the middle of the 19th century when the area had a lot of tanneries where there were lots of cattle butchered, and there was a rail line, which is now the High Line, which ran all the way down the west side of Manhattan and up to Poughkeepsie. And this encouraged people looking for work to move into this area, and tenement buildings were built. In the mid-19th century, it was primarily Irish immigrants who came to this area. And the area is still largely inhabited by people of Irish descent. But things changed over the years, and a lot of those industries left the area, and the area became very downtrodden. But the area also overlaps the theater district when you get up to 45th Street. And you have 45th Street up to 59th Street. I'd say you had a lot of actors living in the area, people who worked in the theaters. It was probably a little more upscale, better living conditions. In this area, you also, to this day, find fabulous restaurants on 8th, 9th, and even 10th Avenue. Some little holes in the wall where you just get great food. This is an area that really, to my heart, is New York. It reminds me of the New York I knew, and it's disappearing. Many of the buildings are older. They're very expensive to bring up to code and to repair. It is the last bastion of affordable housing in Manhattan, one of the last, other than perhaps up in Inwood. And the housing has gotten quite run down. It's very expensive to repair. So developers have been arriving, and the area has increasingly been gentrified with some skinny little condominium buildings being built. The way I look at it, very little regard for the history of the neighborhood. The neighborhood is also where there were Irish gangs, the Westies, who ruled with an iron fist and terrorized the entire neighborhood in the early 1900s. It is also probably the neighborhood about which West Side Story was written. There was a famous rumble or fight between two rival gangs, an Irish gang and a Puerto Rican gang. I think it was in the 1930s, and this was the basis for the story of West Side Story. Since then, the place has been sanitized, if you will. It's been cleaned up considerably. 42nd Street used to extend over to 8th Avenue, and all up and down 8th Avenue you had, porn shows and peep shows and, the way I remember things, smut. But it's all been sanitized, and they're building. It's a much more affluent population now. Lots of young people are coming to the neighborhood to live in the newly constructed apartment or condominium buildings. Some buildings turned into cooperatives. There are still some rental buildings in the area, very tall new buildings which describe themselves as luxury housing. But the neighborhood has really flipped. So it is really bordered on the north side by what would be considered the south side of the Upper West Side. And on the south end, it's bordered by Hudson Yards, which is very affluent. So it's a little pocket of old New York, which will probably not exist for much longer.